So Pat and I have been friends for a number of years, but this is probably the fifth event like this that we've had. And I continue to use Pat as a resource because she has seen a large number of students that I've had in the past, a number of people I've worked with, people I've been on staff with. She is an excellent therapist, but specifically specializing in the area of loss, grief, anxiety, and depression with teenagers. So very much the wheelhouse of my day in and day out. I love being able to kind of resource Pat and kind of go, hey, what do you think about this? So I ask because she is absolutely a thought leader in this area and someone who spent more than 20 years working with the specific category we're going to be talking about tonight. So Pat, thank you for being willing to do this.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you were here.
I have to be full disclosure. The person that gave him the parenting tip about tax was me. I said at 3, you got to let them rock their own style and build their confidence. I'm telling you this as a friend. It's going to pay off when they're a teen.
We'll have a lot of raw conversations tonight. One will be, we lost a dog a couple months ago, and I called Pat, and I'm like, do I talk to my 3-year-old about the dog that's not here anymore? And so, of course, Pat, you were excellent as always. Like, Brian, 3 things I would do. And I'm like, you're a genius, Stepler. You're a genius. All right, well, let's just dive in. Remember that you have your 3x5 note card, so if at any point you'd like some clarification on something Pat's talking about or I'm talking about, or just a more general question, please take a second, write it down. You can kind of hold up your hand real quick, and a staff member will grab that. We'll try to get to that at the end. Pat, and I have my cheat sheet cards here, so I feel a little bit like Oprah. Do you think our kids are dealing with anxiety, depression, and stress more than we did? I'm in my early 40s. You're much younger than that. But would you say our teenagers are dealing with it more than we did when we were younger?
I think it's a really interesting question, and if you actually look back on the history of mental illness, this is not new. So all through history, there's been descriptions and identifications and people trying to figure out how the mind works and how the body works. So this is not a new phenomenon, what we're dealing with. But I do think there are very unique things to what our teens are going through, which is making it feel more increased, be more increased, and more stressful. So first off, this generation has had more awareness and more dialogue about what stress, anxiety, and depression is than I did and my parents did. And so there's just an awareness of what this is, and there's a language and an open dialogue. So that's a good thing. That's helping breaking the stigma. That's helping breaking previous stereotypes, and it's helping people get help. So it's actually identifying what is going on appropriately. That's a good thing. Another thing our teens have is they have access to information like no other generation, right? They have access 24/7 to Google and news and tablets and everything. So they're searching, they're curious, they're wanting to know what is going on, why they're feeling how they're feeling. And also, I did a little Wikipedia, or I did a little timeline, because I thought this was really interesting, because I thought it was such an interesting question. So I went back just to 2001 and kind of did a brief Google search of what were some historical events or technological advances that make it different for our teens than people in the 90s. So people 21 or younger have dealt with all of these things already in their life, and this is just the ones I could think of. 2001, 9/11 attack. From 2001 to 2021, the war in Afghanistan. 2002 to 2011, Iraq war. 2006, Facebook and Twitter were open to the public. 2007, the first iPhone was released. 2008, financial recession. 2010, Instagram started. 2011, Snapchat started. Between 2000 and 2018, 277 FBI-designated active shooter incidents in the US. And locally, 2017, Thomas fires. 2018, borderline shooting. 2020, pandemic. 2021, pandemic. 2022, pandemic. That's a long list. It stresses me out reading it and even like looking it up. And I'm well advanced with coping skills and resources. And if you think about each one of these little incidents as a pebble that's going into a pond, each one of these has massive ripple effects. So it's just pounding upon pounding upon and pounding upon pounding. So this is primarily why we're seeing such an increase and why it's important that we need to talk about it, we need to learn about it, and we need to help our teens.
Wow. I didn't even we had talked a little bit about some of these questions, but when I think about the active shooter scenarios and things, it's even bigger than I guess I had even previously processed. I'm sure we have parents in here that have both 10, 11, 12-year-olds, as well as some in here that have 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. How does age change how we experience? And in just a moment, I know we're going to break up stress, anxiety, and depression. We won't continue to talk about that as kind of a monolithic category. But for now, how does age change how we experience these things?
I think what's important to remember is that stress, anxiety, and depression are feelings. All of us have them. We have them at all stages of our life and all ages of our lives. The difference is that age, the triggers for what triggers those feelings and how we cope with those feelings is different throughout age. So for example, I have a 7-year-old, but I'm gonna start with babies. When our babies are stressed, babies experience stress when they're cold, when they're wet, when they're hungry, when they're tired, and they let us know that they're feeling stressed by they cry, so we meet their needs. Toddlers, we know toddlers have big feelings. Toddlers feel anxiety, they feel stress, they can feel depression as well. They feel the triggers for that might be when they're told no, when they go to a new place, when they have to share, when they're separated from their parents. They show us that this is how they're feeling by screaming, throwing a tantrum, maybe being really clingy to mom and dad because they're really scared and nervous. So our teens also have these same feelings, and they're triggered for different reasons. So I think it's really important to remember in adolescence is an age range where they're dealing with a lot of firsts. So if you think back to your teen years, it might be the first time they ever try out for a sport team. It might be the first time they ever try out for the band or a musical. It might be the first time they're ever told no. It might be the first time they ever experience rejection, learn how to drive. They're faced with so many firsts while their bodies are rapidly changing physically and hormonally. They're put into peer pressure situations that they might not be equipped for or know how to handle. And they're also dealing with pressure of the future. So I say adolescence, what that is they have one foot, they're hurdling this line, and one foot is wanting total independence, and then the other foot is, but I need my parents and I need help. And they're in the middle trying to figure out, how do I function day to day? So that's how it can look really different from ages. And then I know even for myself in my 40s, I still feel stress, anxiety, and depression. And what is important for parents to know is it is our responsibility to model when we have those feelings, how do we cope with them in a healthy way? How do we tell our kids, and honestly, like, honey, I'm feeling really stressed right now. This is what stress looks like, and this is what I'm doing to take care of myself. We are models, and we are with our kids more than anyone else. So if we can start modeling healthy ways and identifying these feelings that we have, it's a kickoff to help open the dialogue down the road.
Yeah, I like that. I think you bring up, and we know from neuroscience that the frontal parts of the brain, a lot of those decision-making things aren't formed until people are in their mid-20s, late 20s. And so, they do experience it in different ways. It is ongoing. I grew up, and I don't know if you did, but I kind of grew up in a church and in a youth group where we didn't have as much access to mental health resources, definitions, things like that. And so I grew up in a time, especially in the South, where, no one was depressed. They just needed more vitamin D, or no one was depressed. No, you just needed to dust yourself off and move forward. And I'm so grateful, like you said, now there's a greater awareness. There are a lot of tools and resources available so that we can address these things in a really healthy way, in a proactive way. What are some ways that we can begin identifying depression in our teenagers? At what point do we need to begin to pay more attention? It's not just a bad day. It wasn't just a bad week. It wasn't just a bad breakup. This is now something more.
And so this is where we're going to kind of break it down. Like I said, depression and sadness they are feelings. They're legitimate feelings. And then they are also clinical diagnoses. So how do we know the difference? Is my kid just sad today, or is my kid going through a rough patch? Or is this something else that might be going on in the mind and in the brain that we really need to get some help for? And so in terms of depression, what I always encourage is to look for emotional changes and behavioral changes. So we have to know that People, and especially teens, do not always communicate with their words, right? They're not likely going to come to you and say, Mom, I'm feeling really depressed. Can you please take me to the therapist? That would be amazing if they said that. But likely that's not what's happening in your household, because you wouldn't be here. You would have already called me. And so you're wanting to know what is going on with my kid. There's all these behaviors going on. I don't know what this means. What does this look like? I'm worried. I'm scared. So some things that we want to look for in terms of depression that would be an emotional change would be if your teen is crying for long periods of time with no apparent reason, right? It just seems like, okay, I know you're sad, but I don't know why these tears are coming, and they think the tears aren't stopping. If they're feeling easily irritated, if there's a lot of body image issues or self-blame or criticism that they're having. Also, if they start to lose interest. So if they've always played soccer and they love it, and then they're like, no, I don't want to do that anymore. Okay, that's worth a conversation, and that's worth a mental note of like, okay, I need to kind of explore why is this change happening? That's a love that you've had for years and years, and now you don't want to have anything to do with that. That's not the only cue. So we're looking at like a cluster of these things going on. Also, if there's a sensitivity to rejection, and if your child is talking about themes of death or dying or suicide, that is like red flag, red flag, red flag, red flag. So behavioral changes that you might see, and I'm sure you guys are seeing in your household, some of you, are social withdrawal. So they might just want to be in the room all the time, all the time, and on the screen all the time. We don't want our kids withdrawing like that. If you see that they love school and now they don't want to go to school anymore, that would be a sign that needs to be addressed. Or if there's a drastic drop in their grades, if there's any substance abuse going on, any alcohol use or drug use, any risky behaviors. Also, we need to know that self-harm is occurring in our community and with our teens, and we need to take that as a very serious sign if we have a teen in our home or a teen that we love that's self-harming. And it's an immediate situation if you have any teen that's talking about having a plan or a desire to commit suicide.
What is the difference, or how do I diagnose the difference? And not that I'm the one, or we as parents are able to diagnose, but what is anxiety in differentiation to depression? So a moment, a season, a week, a kind of a punctuated part of the month where it's like they're really anxious right now, but I don't know if it's elevated or escalated to depression. I guess maybe what I'm asking is, how do you separate the two? What's the difference?
So this is where it gets tricky. So a lot of what I said, the behavioral changes and the emotional changes can look very similar for anxiety and depression. And some people can actually have anxiety and depression occur at the same time. But it's really important to know that they're two separate mental disorders. And this is where I'm not talking about the feelings. I'm actually talking about what a mental health provider would diagnose you as. So we have this book called the DSM-5, which has all sorts of mental health disorders and criteria that has to be met to get that diagnosis. And so anxiety has its own category in the DSM-4, and there's actually 11 different disorders that fit under the category of anxiety. So this can get really complex it's a lot more than just saying anxiety. Like there's 11 specific diagnosable disorders that fit under that category that have their own unique criteria and their own unique symptoms. Depression is the same. It has its own category in the DSM-4, and there's 8 different types of depressive disorders. So it can be very complex. So this is where it's really, really important that you seek either a medical doctor or a mental health professional to help get a thorough assessment. This is not what you want to go diagnosed on TikTok, or this is more than just a 4-question scenario that you did on Facebook quiz, or what WebMD says. Those are great places to learn about the symptoms, but they're not diagnostic tools, and it's actually kind of complex. So this is where you would need to reach out and get some more help. And how I, as a professional, kind of explain it to parents when they come in. What happens is a parent will come in or they'll call me and say, this is what's going on in my house. These are the behaviors, or these are what my concerns are. This is what's happening. So my job as a mental health professional is to figure out what is driving the brain, right? So it could be anxiety, it could be depression, it could be something else. And so what I do is I go through an assessment process and I communicate it with the parents to really help hash out like what is going on with your kid. Is this anxiety? Is it an anxiety brain that's driving these behaviors? Is it a depression that's going on in the brain that's driving these behaviors, or is it something else?
That's really helpful. One theme that I hope comes out tonight in this conversation is really a piece of advice that's not from me originally. One of our mutual friends, Claire Veldin, is a pastor at Calvary Chapel, Oxnard, and we've been friends for a number of years. And my younger daughter, I only have one daughter, my younger child, Mac, is disabled, and Clairville also has a disabled child. And very early on, when we were, kind of acclimating to Mac and some of the things we were going through, she said, Brian, you've got to build a team. Nothing will be more important than building a team around you. She said, call it Team Mac. And she said, you build a team that will support you and help you over the next coming years. What you're describing as we're going through this really tough time with teenagers is don't be afraid to build a team. Mm-hmm. Don't be afraid to invite other people, mental health professionals, pastors, mentors, people like that, into your family and onto your teenager's team. I think one of the worst things we can do is isolate in these moments and kind of be like, well, we just got to kind of white knuckle this, just my husband and I, or just me as a single parent, or just me as a grandma. You've got to build a team to address these kind of things.
Yeah, and just to tag team off of that, I love when people come in and say, I have a team of people that are praying for my family, or they're able to help. You don't have to understand mental illness or be a professional or a medical doctor to support families. You can say, hey, you're struggling. I can help with carpool. I can help get your kids to school and back to school. I can help get them to soccer practice. I can pray over you guys. If you had a really rough night, I can bring dinner over so you don't have to do that. Like, there's so much that everyone can do to partner and surround families that are professional and from the church, and then also just from the community, that is going to lead to a lot of healing and hope and thriving and quicker. The more that there are people supporting and the bigger your team is, it's just beneficial for everyone.
That's good. If we are able to identify that our preteen or teenager or young adult in our life is struggling with anxiety or depression, what are some strategies and what are some first steps that we should be taking, that we should be thinking about?
Mm-hmm. So I could talk for hours on this, so it was really hard. I really put a lot of thought into what do I think can really benefit you guys if I had to just sum it up in a question. So know that there's a lot of strategies that can be done, but what I really think is the most important, and it became very evident in the pandemic, is that we need to help our teens and ourselves have a toolkit of coping skills. So I know what my stress shot up during the pandemic is because things that used to bring me relaxation and peace and comfort, such as going to the beach or going to my community pool or traveling, was taken away during the pandemic, right at the beginning of it. So a lot of coping skills I had, and I have a lot because I talk about this all day long. I hope I have a lot. I know a lot. Were taken away. And so if we only have one or two things in our coping skills box and then that gets taken away, we're really in a lost spot. So we as parents need to help our kids, and it's fun. It's help them explore and learn other ways to cope. And so if you're thinking of a toolbox as an illustration, I like to break down the tools into 4 different categories. So think of that you need physical coping skills, creative coping skills, spiritual coping skills, and support coping skills. And I'll kind of break those down, why I think those are important. So we know that our mind and our body are connected. And we also know that emotions are going to show up physically in our body in different ways. So for example, when we're feeling stressed, we often have muscle tension, or we might have joint pains or headaches. That's because the emotion is showing in a physical manner. When people are depressed, they'll often have a very hunched over posture. If you look at how they stand, it looks like they're carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders, physically and visually. That's what the depression feels like. People with anxiety might be having chest pains. That's a physical manifestation of this feeling that's going on. So in terms of physical coping skills, it's really important that we're moving our bodies. So that can look any way you want it to look. You know, it can look like deep breathing. There's actual science that shows that deep breathing increases oxygen and is healing for our body. It's not just a silly thing to do. Yoga, or stretching your body in the morning, is stretching your muscles and creating blood flow that's going to energize you. Walking, swimming, hiking, running, any variety that you want, playing soccer, things like that. Some people, massage helps them, or acupuncture helps them, because they really need to release some of the tension that's held in their body. So those are just some examples of ways you can cope in a physical way. Another way where I put creative is, I find, especially with anxiety and anyone that's an overthinker and an analytical thinker, we're usually stuck in the left brain hemisphere, and that's being overactive if we're looking at our brain. So the left brain hemisphere is a much more of our analytical, logical thinking part of our brain. And when we can be stuck in anxiety, or we're stuck in analyzing, or we're stuck in a negative thought process, that side of our brain is just like firing, 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 firing. It's getting tired. It's an engine that's wearing out and wants a break. And so if we can tap into our creative side, which is actually the right side of brain hemisphere, then it gives us breathing space. And it gives that part of a brain recovery time and some healing time. And you don't have, I'm not artistic at all, but it's not like there's no talent, there's no judgment of it, but doing something creative as a coping skill is so healing, and just giving our brain a time to rest. And then we're making sure that our wiring in our brain is going crisscross, 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 which is the healthiest equilibrium. I'm not a brain doctor, so sorry if that's too much brain stuff. But creative ideas would be drawing, doodling. I have an adult coloring book that I use regularly. I'm a total nerd. I like the dot to dots. That's creative to me, because then I feel like I have a beautiful drawing at the end. Writing poetry, playing an instrument, any type of creative outlet that you can think of, and get creative with like what a creative outlet is.
Your brilliant husband is an engineer, and one of his creative outlets, because he's very analytical, is he 3D prints these like little fidgets, and like little. So like in my old office, I had a whole bunch of like little 3D dinosaurs that he printed. He's one of those brilliant men you'll ever meet, and I'm like, you're making fidgets and dinosaurs? I'm like, yeah, man, I need like a creative outlet. So, yeah, you're practicing this in your home.
And sometimes it's playful. That's why I said this can be fun with your kids. It can be building Legos again. It can be like building it can be fun. Like coping skills don't have to be like, oh, a task. Like it's just also can create connection and interaction with your kids, which that's all beneficial, right? So get creative and have some fun and play. We all need that no matter what age we are. So spirituality, right? We know that God is a sense of hope for us, and that being connected to something outside of us and bigger than us is important, a part of being a human being. So in our spiritual category or slot in our toolkit, that would be, developing a prayer life, or finding a devotion, or memorizing a scripture that really brings you peace and comfort when you're feeling depressed or you're having anxiety. Coming to youth group, parents connecting in small groups, connecting with your church. Also, for me, a huge way of connecting spiritually is being out in nature. I find God being in creation, and I find peace being in creation, and my child finds peace being in creation. And so that's a huge amount of coping skills. Anyone that follows my personal Instagram knows we are always in the green or the water. and that's because it helps us, and then it helps my family. And then the final category is support. As we kind of said earlier, support is so important. Support for you as parents and support for these kids that you love is so important. So that can look like joining a support group. There's a lot. Hopefully now that we're opening up more, there will be more support groups that are meeting in person. It could also mean joining a small group, joining a church, volunteering. It's amazing, even when you're depressed and you're anxious, if you take time and give back to someone else and serve someone else, how that can change your mood and your emotions. Also, some people aren't people, and they're animal people. So support might be through an animal, or visiting the Humane Society and feeling some release and comfort through our fuzzy people if we're not ready to talk to people.
I love that. You made me think of, the old adage, it's the cobbler's kids who don't have shoes. Mm-hmm. We went to Mexico not too long after I was doing a wedding. And whenever somebody asks you to do a wedding and say they'll pay for you to fly down and do their wedding on the beach in Mexico, and I'm like, yeah. And I don't love doing weddings, but I love doing weddings in Mexico. And but we didn't have a will, and we had 2 kids. And like, I'm married to a lawyer, and we didn't have a will. Cobbler shoes, right? And so we made a will, and we went on this trip. It makes me think about, when we think about our teens struggling with anxiety and depression, and we're like, oh, you need to be going to youth group, or why aren't you praying and memorizing scripture? And you yourself are not taking care of your own mental health. You're not taking care of your own anxiety. You're not taking care of your own kind of pouring in and restoring yourself. And so much of that is, making sure you're plugged into a small group, you're coming on Sunday morning, you're a part of a community of faith. We model those things with our kids. And it also feels disingenuous to be like, you need to care for yourself. And they're like, but Mom, you're not, or Dad, you're not. I'm like, yikes. So, okay, so my next question is kind of in the vein of communication. We wish, right, that we all had teenagers that were just super self-aware, had a high EQ, and they were like, I don't think I'm doing well. I think I probably need to see a therapist. I need to see a counselor. But overwhelmingly, that's not likely, right? And in fact, a lot of times in parent trainings, I'll tell parents that there are those nights where a teenager wants to talk, and I will pause everything in my life. I call it when the moons align or the stars align, because you'll ask all the time, like, how's school? Are you still dating so-and-so? How's basketball? I'm like, fine, nothing. And then for no reason, they'll just start pouring stuff out, and it's that moment like, you can go to bed 2 hours late. I will burn an entire tank of gas driving around the neighborhood. If you're talking, I will stop everything to hear what's going on in your life. In moments where we might either have that window or we identify some of the things you're talking about, how do we communicate with our teenagers about mental health? How do we do it in a way that's not deceptive? How do you like, I want you to talk to a friend of mine. She'll have degrees on the wall, But how do we communicate with our kids in a healthy way about, we need to talk about mental health?
So parents, it really comes to you guys first modeling it. And I know a lot of us did not come from a household, or some of us, myself included, did not come to a household where emotions were talked about a lot, and so it might feel really uncomfortable and it might feel really strange. And also, I'm a therapist, so I've gotten a lot of training in this. I'm married to an engineer, so I know what it's like having someone that talking about emotions is a little uncomfortable, I've trained him very well, and he's doing excellent. But some of us, it's just not our personality. It's not our go-to. It feels uncomfortable. We don't know what to ask. We don't know what to do. And it just feels weird, right? Talking about emotions can feel really weird for some people. That is okay if you are in that situation. But if you are in that situation, it's also really your responsibility to take some time to learn about how you feel and how do you identify feelings, and then start modeling that and having those, just inserting that into dialogues with your kid. So an example for me, one thing, I have a 7-year-old, so I'm not in the teen years yet, but when she was very young, I experienced a significant loss in my house, and I was like, and my family, and I was like, how on earth am I going to explain grief to a 2-year-old? And how am I going to communicate this? And what on earth am I going to do? And I just committed that I am going to be honest with her, and I'm going to model for her, this is what grief looks like. If mommy's sad, I'm going to say mommy's sad, and I'm going to say why mommy's sad. And I'm also going to assure my child that mommy is taking care of herself. This sadness is not going to take over mommy, and mommy has healthy ways to care for herself. So just simple things like that is how we can model for it. If you're really stressed out from home and you had a hard day at work and you're banging the cabinets and you're trying to get dinner, and your kid says, hey, Mom, are you okay? Don't be like, yeah, I'm fine. You're not fine. Just say I'm stressed out and I'm trying to get dinner on the table, and it's going to happen, and I got it under control, but this is what stress looks like. Like our kids want us to show them what emotions look like, and that can be really hard. And with teens, I tell all parents, it's hard. Every stage of parenting is hard. But with teens, parents have got to be courageous, and you've got to be brave, and you've got to be willing to have the conversations that are uncomfortable. That means you've got to talk to them about sex, alcohol, drugs, depression, suicide, self-harm, relationships. These are such important conversations that might scare you to have. It might scare you what the answers are, but we've got to be courageous as parents and start the dialogue in the home. We also have to, when we have that dialogue, we have to be able to listen to what our kids say. Even if the answer to the question we asked is really upsetting to us or not what we want to hear, we have to be able to listen, and we have to be able to love our kids through whatever that answer is that they say. So it's a lot of work for parenting on the communication, because if we don't model it, they're not going to do it. And it's our responsibility to really lay the foundation to have open dialogues throughout their whole entire life. I always tell parents, if they're not getting answers from you, they're getting the answers. They're either getting it from their peers or the internet. That scares the heck out of me. I would much rather have my kid get the answer from me and the information from me than from Google any day. Even if I stumble through it, even if I answer it like a babbling buffoon, I would rather have them ask me than the internet. And I promise you, your kids will get the answer one way or another. So it's your choice if you want to be the one that guides them through that, or if they're going to seek it somewhere else.
I love that. And you also do a great job of dispelling the rumor or idea that we have this conversation one time and it's over, right? Mm-hmm. I'll never forget, I was allowed to date in my house after I could drive, but I'd been dating for a couple of years, and I went out on a date. I was out at my house one time, and my dad just really like awkwardly, I was reaching for the door, and he was like, "Hey, son, you know how to treat a lady, right?" I was like, Dad, I'm late. I got to go. And he's like, "Well, I mean, I know this is not your first rodeo." And I'm like, what? I don't even know what you're saying right now. He's like, "All right, have a good time." And that was literally how he satisfied my mother that we had the talk. That was it. I'm like, oh, man. I just hope my parents don't watch this video. And so, it's a true story, Dad.
So I actually have a question for you.
Okay.
So, as you guys know, mental health services are tapped out, right? Like we're getting a lot of calls. There's a lot of needs. There's not enough workers. So I'm asking you as a professional, we need more support in this area. We need supports from the church, and we need supports from the community. And so I want to ask you, as a pastor, that's your wheelhouse. How does the church, from a theological and biblical stance, address, or can they talk about mental illness?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think we've always done a good job of doing it in the church. First of all, as a pastor and theologian, just resoundingly, there is nothing in Scripture or any of church history to suggest seeing a mental health professional addressing a mental health need or even taking medications. There's nothing prohibitive in all of Scripture or in all of church history to suggest we shouldn't be doing these things. We shouldn't be availing ourselves and our family to all of these needs. We have to destigmatize this idea that Christians don't see therapists, that Christians don't see counselors. And the more we as parents or as believers or as church leaders are like, you just have to pray it out. You just have to pray it through. You just have to read more Scripture. It's not that any of those disciplines are wrong, but we've done a really terrible job at communicating that God has given us these things, these tools, these coping mechanisms that are often somebody like a therapist or counselor. Maybe we do have a chemical imbalance, that God has given us these things to aid us along our journey in pursuit of glorifying God and enjoying Him forever. My 3-year-old came home from preschool the other day, and he was like, "Dad, did God give us our house?" And I said, "Well, yes, son, he did, but God grew the trees that gave us the wood, and then He gifted a craftsman to be able to cut it and build it, and then He gifted someone to be an electrician. So in that way, God gave us our house." In the same way, so much of the healing and work God wants to do can come from faith-based counseling, faith-based coaching, faith-based therapy. When we talk about a chemical imbalance, we're talking about the need for maybe medicine or interventions in those ways. And again, we have to destigmatize these things in the church. We have access to them, and if they help us, we need to absolutely avail ourselves to them. And I think my last thing I'd probably say is that, because I tell people regularly, I'm a recovering Baptist. We tell people all the time that, it's faith shaming to say you should just be able to pray all these things away. You should be able to memorize enough Scripture. Again, I'm a pastor. You should be praying. You should be memorizing Scripture. In fact, that time of prayer every morning is how I really prepare my heart for a very anxiety at times ridden day and schedule. But we also need therapists and counselors, and our teenagers need to hear us say, we will do what we need to do to help you. I'm on your team. I want to be here, and I want to come alongside you and support you. And so I think one thing the church can do is normalize it. I have been in ministry for 25 years now, and every well-adjusted pastor or missionary I know has seen a therapist or counselor at some point. Every pastor or missionary I know that's well-adjusted has seen a counselor or therapist at some point. But we don't talk about it. We don't say that. We allow people to have this kind of assumed aura about us of like, oh man, that guy knows enough scripture, that woman knows enough Bible that they would never need to see somebody like that. And they're absolutely wrong. They're absolutely wrong. So I think the more we demystify that, the more we destigmatize it of like, no, like if you need to see a therapist, you need to see a counselor, let's do this. If you need Jesus and meds, if you need Jesus and a therapist, we are all about that. Absolutely. Does that help?
That helps because we are a team, and we all need to be a team really to support our families and each other because we're a community.
That's right.
We're not separate. And I always say, you know, as being a therapist and being in this field for 20 years and why I come do these talks with Brian on a regular basis and come specifically to churches is because there doesn't need to be a divide between this is psychology and this is Bible. There needs to be a bridge that is connecting the two and supporting each other and giving resources back and forth to one another. So.
Absolutely. I agree. Yeah, I agree with that. At what point should we begin elevating our teenagers' needs to professional help? So maybe I have a teenager in my home, you're listing some of these things that I'm going through kind of the last couple months or weeks or years, and I'm like, yeah, like my kid's probably ticking some of those boxes. I see some of these clusters you're describing. At what point should I go, okay, we need to have a conversation, and I should probably elevate this to adding someone onto our family's team to care for, mentor, and come alongside my teenager?
Yeah. I mean, of course, my job as a therapist is safety is always my number one priority. So if there is any thought of a safety concern with your child in terms of if you think they're self-harming, if you think that they're abusing drugs or alcohol, if they're talking about death or dying, or you're just getting this mom or dad or grandma or uncle intuition that something is really wrong and there's a big red flag and it could possibly lead to suicide, you need to get immediate help. If a school calls you and a teacher calls you or a principal or school counselor and says, ooh, we heard some things that your kid was saying that's kind of scary about talking about maybe death or dying, that needs to be taken very seriously. And mental health professionals, we will guide you through that process. It's the scariest call any parent can get, and I know that, but we will guide you through that, and it's important that you get help immediately for any safety concerns. The second thing I would say, you know, there's some resources in the back that go into more of what those emotional and behavioral kind of checkoff boxes are, if you want to say. So if you're kind of looking at that and you're like, oh wow, my kid's kind of exhibiting a lot of these behavioral or emotional changes, or if I'm just seeing changes in my kid, it's worthwhile to just consult your school counselor. You know, you can always start at your school, start with your school counselor, or call a therapist, or just get some consultation or set up an appointment. I tell every single parent, I'm an expert in mental illness. Every single one of you is an expert in your kid. You have spent the most time with your child. You have spent the most hours. You have spent the most time. You know what their cues are and what their triggers are and what their buttons are. So every parent is an expert in their own kid. So if you're feeling like something is off, you need to honor that and get some help. And then the third thing I've been seeing more recently is I've had parents call me and they're like, my kid says they want to come to a therapist. I don't really know why. Like, things seem good and their grades are good and they're still playing on soccer and stuff, but I want to honor their request. And so I called you. Can you walk me through the process? And that's such a loving thing because in some of those situations, those teens by coming to therapy, that's their cry for help, or that's their way of saying there's something I can't communicate to you and I need help. And so if you can honor that request, sometimes we can prevent a lot of things from happening. Because then I've had to have conversations with parents like, well, this is what's kind of going on and why they do want to talk to me. And in other situations, it's been, okay, I just wanted to kind of get a couple tools, and it's been one or two situations, and then they go on their way. So I promise you, with a therapist, I don't want to keep your kid longer than they need to be with me. I want your kids to be healthy, and I want your kids to have tools. And any therapist wants your kid to come to us and then be free from us and be free in the world. So I am never going to make a kid be in therapy every week if they don't need to be in therapy every week. And I want to communicate that to you. So don't let that be a fear if you think, oh, if I call a therapist and we're committing to this for like 3 years and a lot of money. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not.
That's good. There's a counselor in Thousand Oaks that I and a number of other associate pastors and lead pastors in the 805 see semi-regularly, and he's a delightful man. He is actually was a Presbyterian priest for years and years, but he tells us that we come and we need to metabolize our feelings, and there'll be a brief season where maybe we see him a couple times or so forth, and then we won't speak for a year or two, and then maybe something else happens in our life, like a loss or grief or something like that, and we go back and see him. But I like that kind of that language of we all need help in seasons of our life metabolizing our emotions and our feelings. And it's not forever. It's not always going to be this way. But in this moment, we need to help our teenagers. And maybe we're not the person to help them metabolize and process those things. And this counselor would be. So this is a good moment to remind you that if you have any questions, go ahead and write that on your little card. And then when you get a second, you just kind of pop it up and someone will come forward, and then we'll grab those in just a second. I asked you when we spoke a couple weeks ago for a couple of resources. I have 3 of those on the back. I'd love for you to tell us about some of those resources. I've got one myself. But again, those books that you're about to talk about are on the salmon sheet, or the salmon piece of paper in your chair. And then there's a number of articles, blogs. There's even a TED Talk on there, some videos that I would absolutely point you to from Fuller Youth Institute and a number of other trusted resources that we as a church have some faith in. But tell us about some of the books you put on the back table.
Yeah, I highlighted 3 books, and they're not necessarily parenting books, but they're resources that I think are good and deal with a wide range of things for why you might be here. And there's also, hopefully there's enough printed back there. It looks like there's still stuff back there. So I did add a sheet with other books outside of these 3 that I recommended, and then also some professional resources available in Ventura. And I just also want to highlight myself, and then my colleague is in the back. This is Christy. She works out of the private practice that I work at too, and so she just wanted to be here to let you guys know that there are a lot of therapists available in the community, but it doesn't have to be a therapist. So the 3 books I highlighted, one is Brainstorm. It's by Dr. Dan Siegel. If you really liked the 2-second talk I talked about the brain, that's the best book to get. Dan Siegel is out of UCLA. He's an intraneurobiologist. I forgot his name, but I love everything that he writes. And so Brainstorm is specifically written for parents and teenagers to also read, which explains what is going on in the brain during the adolescence years. And so it really gets into how brains can be rewired and specific techniques that can be used and strategies and things like that. So if you're into the science, Brainstorm is the book you want. Google anything by Dr. Dan Siegel. He's phenomenal, and his team is. He talks on all ages and stages of parenting. The other book I have is Brene Brown's newest book called Atlas of the Heart, I think is what it is. It's brand new. And why I picked that book, I'm a huge Brene Brown fan, but I also picked that book because it's essentially a dictionary in her beautiful style of writing that explains and defines 87 feelings that are the human experience. So we know if we can define and have common language about feelings, if we're all on the same page about how we feel, that's going to help us connect with our children and also guide and figure out kind of what they need. So I kind of look at that as like a feelings dictionary, which is written and research-based and can give you a common ground if you're trying to figure out what your feelings are or you're trying to teach feelings to your kids. And then the third book is 131
131 conversations. Mm-hmm.
It just looked fun. It's got just questions to ask to start open dialogue and start conversations with your kids that you can do in the car or at dinner or on the way to soccer practice or, whenever you have time. So it looks just kind of like a fun resource.
I love that. Our family life team, little foreshadowing, is actually working on a couple of parent trainings coming up of 20 conversations that you should have with your teenager before they graduate high school, 10 conversations that you'd have with your teenager before they start high school. And so conversation list like that of, have I had this conversation with my 13-year-old? Have I had this conversation with my 15-year-old? And not in a, we're going to call and ask how you're doing and grade you, but rather like I want that list on my fridge of like, hey, honey, it seems about time that we need to start having some of these conversations with our kid. And, there seemed like a lot that on there that haunt me of like, we've not talked with him about that or her about that. Another resource that I want to point people to is really, I was asked this week by email by a parent who was going to come if we could address a little bit about how we pray for our teenagers. And I don't mind addressing that question, although that seems to be the most oft asked and even answered question. What I find to be more helpful is rather what I'd say is what we do with our teenagers is far more impactful than what we do for our teenagers. What we do with our teenagers is far more impactful than what we do for our teenagers. Should you be praying for your teenagers by yourself in your devotional time in the morning and the evening? Absolutely. We should be praying that they are protected from temptation, from influences that could be damaging or difficult, for wisdom and discernment, that God would draw them closer and closer and form them in the image of His Son. And we should also be praying with our teenagers. We should also be, even if those are just brief moments of, hey, Sarah, I know you're really stressed about that chemistry test. What period is that today? 3 o'clock? Great. I'm going to be praying for you. But before you get out of the car, I just want to pray for you right now. Hey, do you still have beef with John right now? Cool. I know you're going to see him today at soccer practice. Real quick, before you get out of the car, can I just pray for you real quick? What you do with your teenagers is far more impactful than what you do for them. And it just seems to carry a different weight than just saying, hey, man, praying for you, buddy, praying for your chemistry test. Do that. But also be praying with them. I think that's just far more impacting and impactful for them to hear your words. I love that all of us have a prayer language, if you will, of this is how I interact and talk with God. And it's so important for me as a dad for not only my children, but also my wife, for my son and daughter to be able to hear this is how dad talks to God. And I want you to hear how mom talks to God. And you're going to learn by praying with us and hearing us pray that this is how we interact with God. And I'm really excited about that. So what an important resource. I hope you're praying for your kids. I really want to encourage you tonight to be praying with your kids. All right. This was the moment. Scott, do you have a couple cards? Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, our executive pastor, Scott Grabendike. Appreciate it very much.
This is a real test. Do we know what we're talking about?
No, not. Some of you have beautiful handwriting, by the way. I would have to type my card up. So first question, and some of these will be kind of specific to you. It looks like,
okay.
And again, I have not read these yet. You specifically do not take private insurance, right?
I do not. So I work for a group private practice called Empire Family and Therapy Services. We're a group practice in Ventura located near the mall. There's 9 therapists out of that, our group right now, that are all licensed. Some of us are faith-based practitioners and some of us are not. But what we are is we're a wheelhouse where we all specialize in working. Our specialty and kind of where our core is working with teens and families. And if you look at a wheel that all 9 of us are on, that's our center, and then each one of us has a little offshoot specialty too. But one of the biggest obstacles that I'm very honest and upfront is our practice does not accept insurance. So
There are, so we use the phrase faith-based all the time. You're a believer. That's a key component of some of the some of the advice and so forth. Christy as well, I know is. How would a parent go about identifying? Because there are faith-based therapists as well that do take insurance. Some do, some don't. What would be some resources that you'd point us to, or you would recommend of, hey, as you're going about finding a faith-based therapist, I would recommend, or I'd think about, or questions I'd even ask when you talk to a therapist before your teenager goes for the first time?
So the quickest thing that I can answer, or the quickest advice I can give, so we all know if we go through our medical insurance, right? We look under either psychiatrist, therapist, mental health provider. We just get a list of names, and we're like, do I start with A? Do I start with D? Like, which one do I go? I don't know. It's like nothing about them, right? Do I go with the one that's closest to my house? Do I go with a name that sounds really cool? Like, you have nothing except a name and a location, right? So insurance is beautiful and wonderful, and that's very valid. So what I encourage everyone to do is there is a website, psychologytoday.com. Not every therapist is on this website, but a large amount of therapists are on it, where we have a bio, where we talk more about who we are, what we practice, what we specialize in. You'll see our picture. It will have our contact information. So what I encourage people to do is take your insurance list, go to Psychology Today, and you can filter, which this is beautiful. You can filter for Christian or faith-based or Jewish, or there's a section where if you specifically want that, you can pick the faith you want, and then only people in that search that have identified in their bio they practice that way. Or you can pick, I want someone specializing in substance abuse, or I want someone specializing in autism, or you can pick what you're really looking for. You can filter your search, and you can pick your insurance, and then who pops up for you through that search should meet all of that criteria, where you can read their bio, have their contact information, and it feels a little more personable than just a name on a list, right? So I've seen people have a lot of success going that way. Another way, since I don't take insurance, my biggest referral source is word of mouth. I have a few of my biggest cheerleaders here in this room when I started building my practice 5 years ago that were just rock stars and friends, and that I just given little tidbits to. I never treated them. So word of mouth, ask your friends, right? Say, hey, ask, if you have a trusted friend at work, they probably have your insurance. So ask them, who are you seeing or your kids seeing, if it's a trusted, safe place to ask, Ask someone in your small group, or ask someone in your community or your kid's school. I find that, if there's a connection, it feels a little easier to make that first call. I do tell everyone making that first call to call a therapist is the bravest and most loving act you can do for yourself or your kid. It's one of the hardest things to do. You're calling a stranger, being vulnerable, saying, I need help. That's really, really hard to do. So doing that step, know that takes huge courage and huge strength, and it's the most loving thing you can do for yourself or your child. So please seek people out.
That's great. We have historically had a page on our VMC website that listed a number of therapists and counselors that we recommended. We're in the process of updating that page, and previously it was broken down by not all insurance agencies, but I think it had a couple of big ones like Kaiser does not take does not take insurance, so forth. And so we are in the process of updating that, and when we get that page up again, we will let you know, because we do want to provide those resources as much as possible. This next one I think is kind of for both of us. What is an effective way to limit or eliminate social media in order to protect your teenager from negative influences? So I'll start, and then I'd love to hear your perspective as well. So this is a hot button issue today because every home has different parameters, standards that they set for their teenagers. So I want to be very, very, very cautious. Thanks, God. I want to be very cautious towards parent shaming, in a sense of, well, if you don't do this, you're not a good parent. I don't mean that at all. When I do marriage counseling, every marriage is like a snowflake. It's unique in its composition and how it functions and works and the roles therein, and how we raise our unique individual children is different. My tact as a youth pastor and as a dad has always been freedom and with verifying. So what I tell parents is whenever you decide that it is appropriate for your teenager to have social media, that age varies. Some people feel like their 11 or 12-year-olds can safely have social media. Others feel like they need to wait till they're 13, 14, 15, 16. The rule that I always strenuously encourage, especially when they have their own cell phone or cellular device or a computer in their room, is that if you're going to allow them to have it, the rule should be you always have access to it. And so especially if mom and I are paying for your cell phone, I can take that cell phone up at any moment without any notification, and there shouldn't be anything locked on there that your mother and I can't see. And if there is, you lose the privilege of a cell phone, not because we don't trust you, but because we will have open communication, open rules in this relationship. If your mother and I cannot follow you on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, whatever it is, to be able to see all that you're posting, that's also going to be a red flag for me. That your mother and I we're gonna be able to see what you're posting. It's not because we don't trust you; it's because we don't trust everybody else who has Facebook. We don't trust everybody else who has social media. And then further, there will be moments where your teenager will cross that line; they'll lose your trust. In which case, it's very appropriate to say, "Hey, in this moment, you've really compromised our trust, and so we're going to need to take that away for now." I do think trying to limit the amount of screen time we have is important. Of course, I hope all know about filters on our computers at home. I always recommend these, like Covenant Eyes. There are a number of filters you can place on your computer that they won't be allowed to go to certain websites. They won't be allowed to Google certain things. And there's an accountability partner built into that program that will receive a list of all of the searches and all of the websites that they have visited. And so I have a number of people for whom I'm that accountability. So once a month, I get an email, and it has a printout, a readout of everything they've Google searched and every website that they have searched. And so I'm able to go, hey, can we go grab coffee? Can we grab lunch? I was looking through your inventory, and there's a couple things I want to ask you about. There's a couple questions I have for you. Disagree, agree. We don't always agree. Thoughts?
We don't always agree.
We don't, do we? I don't know if we do or not.
I don't know. I think that's a great answers. I would encourage you guys, instead of looking at it as an age thing, to look at it as a responsibility thing. Social media requires responsibility. If your child is able to show a level of responsibility where you feel like they can handle the freedom and the power that comes with social media, then you guys can make a decision, regarding around that, and what responsibility looks like, and what your parameters and expectations are around that is different for every parent and every family and every age range, right? So I would encourage you, instead of thinking for a magical number, to look at is my child responsible enough to handle what they're going to have access to? And that would be the question that I would ask in terms of, are they getting it or not? And another thing that I'm a huge component for, and I'm very biased because, as I said, there's a lot of nature in my life, digital detoxes are essential. They are essential for me. They are essential for my family. How I do digital detoxes and how I make it a connection to being in nature too is, if I'm at the beach or if my kid's in the pool, I get in the water with her. If I'm in the water, my cell phone's not with me. And I'm connecting with my kid, I'm swimming with my kid, I'm surfing with my kid, I'm kayaking with my kid, and we're both unplugged because it's not with us. It's not with her, and it's not with me. And I just get to be in the moment with my child or my family or my friends. So for me, water is a huge way to, and then it's 2-3 hours, right? We had a blast, we had fun, we were laughing, and neither of us were checking anything, right? It's in the car, it's in the bag. Another thing that I had to do, especially during COVID for my own mental health, was I would purposely drive up to Ojai. I know exactly on the 33 where the mark is, where you lose cell phone reception. And I would often do this at least once a week, where I would go for a hike, and I would take my kid, and I would take my husband, and we would make a family day of it, or I would take friends, and we would hike, or we would picnic, or we would go splash in the creek, and we have no cell phone reception. And it is so freeing and so healing and so great. Like no one can get a hold of us. It was amazing, right? For 30 minutes, an hour, half a day. Some days it was all day, right? I've taken vacations where we've gone to national parks, and inside national parks, we've stayed in places for 3 days where we don't have access to TV or our phones. It's a little scary, but it's also very freeing. So for me and for my family, that works, and I highly encourage whatever that looks like, whatever amount of time you can do and your family can do, unplug. We all need to unplug.
I love that. 3 things, because I'm a pastor, and then I'll pass the offering plate. One, I was reading some research coming out of Fuller Youth Institute, Family Institute, the other day, that the outcomes of children and teenagers that had a regular weekly family dinner is astronomical. The amount of positive outcomes for young adults that pointed to having weekly dinners with mom or dad or mom and dad, just that ability to sit around a table and communicate without technology had enormous dividends for the young adult. Just a table, food. If you're not prioritizing a family dinner without technology, please begin to do so. The same research bore out, though, that even the presence of a cell phone in the vicinity of the meal or on the table, even if someone wasn't touching it or checking it, had a significant effect on the quality of conversations and the intimacy of conversations. So think about that. Even if your phone is just turned face down on the table, research showed that conversations did not go as deep or last as long because of the presence of a cell phone at the meal. And so as I tell our parents all the time, as I tell our teenagers all the time, your cell phones are trying to kill you. So the more you can have these family meals without the cell phone anywhere nearby. Okay, the third thing, and then I'll get off my sawhorse. High horse, sawhorse?
Soapbox.
Soapbox, yeah. Some parents disagree with me about checking their teenagers' phone, checking their teenagers' chats or social media, and I'm willing to have that conversation. I'm willing to have that debate. To me, it is not about what my child's privacy, or it's not even about whether I trust my child. I mean it when I say I don't trust everybody else communicating with my child. And so I love framing it that way when I talk to teenagers. It's not that I don't trust you. I just know how dangerous the World Wide Web can be. I know how dangerous social media can be. And it is my job, it is my primary ministry to protect you and to raise you and to disciple you. And so this is something I have to do to make sure you're safe. And so that's just for Megan and I and parents that ask, that's kind of my position. What can you do when your depressed teen dislikes counseling or resist any type of help you try to provide?
That's tough. It's hard. And I know a lot of people face that. And a lot of kids, I tell parents, getting them to the door is your job. What's done behind the door is my job. So I recommend that you try to find someone you really feel like is a good fit for your family. You know, it doesn't mean that I don't have a magic wand, and I can't make everyone connect with me. But that's really my job as a professional, is like once they come into my door to really use all my bag of tricks and all my education and all of my experience to try to build a connection and a safe space for them. And oftentimes it's faced with quite a lot of resistance. Private practice is a new venture for me. Prior to private practice, I mostly worked with kids on probation and in foster care through various different county agencies. So I know what it's like to meet resistance. You know, those kids, white girl from Texas walking in, those kids don't want to talk to me. It's just like, they're like, who are you? You can't relate to me. You have no idea what you're talking about. And in some circumstances, I didn't. But I know how to create a safe, loving environment. And I know how to be patient and willing to meet them where they're at. And do the best of my ability. But I do know that this is a struggle. And I also think forcing kids to go to therapy can create harm. If your kid is absolutely against it, like if it's creating massive fights to get there, if it is such a struggle, you don't want to create an environment where therapy feels like a punishment, a consequence, or something that they have to do because they're bad. We want therapy to be a tool and a resource for them that they will hopefully tap into through various stages of their life. So I never want it to be this traumatic experience of having to go to therapy as a child because I was forced to and my parents made me do it. So it's really hard. It's hard to just really answer that question because it's a hard question in a few seconds. But I would keep encouraging it. I would ask other people to speak into your child's life about their experience with therapy. If they maybe, I know in some situations, the parents have asked them to go to therapy. They've said, heck no. Their best friend ends up actually seeing me as well. And I've had this happen where they're like, hey, why don't you come over and play? And they're like, no, I got to go see Pat. I got therapy today. And the kid's like, what? You go to therapy? And then they're like, well, maybe, okay. You're like cool and my friend, and maybe I'll try this. And who are you talking to? So like sometimes like ask other people to speak into your kid's life. Like maybe a teacher saying like, hey, can you go talk to the school counselor? Or can you talk to me? Or, you know, a coach or a youth pastor. Like if you go here, maybe Parker saying it could have a different response than the parents saying this is something you have to do.
I like that. Quick question, follow-up. How do you feel about, because this has happened before, how do you feel about kind of negotiating what they would like in a therapist? Meaning, you know, we've had teenagers before be like, Mom, I'll go, but I want to see a guy. Mom, I'll go, but I really want it to be, you know, I really just want it to be a woman, or I really want it to be a young woman, or I really want it to be an older woman. Would you recommend that, of kind of letting them set the parameters of like, fine, I'll go, but it's got to be an older guy, a younger guy, or whatever?
So sometimes the reason for resistance to therapy can be wide, right? But in how I'm going to answer this question, if they're resisting because they're feeling like they don't have control of anything, this is a great opportunity to give them a chance to have some control. Find a practice that might have multiple therapists at it that that you can afford or your insurance covers, and say, hey, I like this practice. Here's a list of 5 people that work out of it. I want you to look at their pictures and read your bios and pick, right? So you're still setting parameters that this is what we're doing, and you have had choice in where it's provided. You've kind of vetted that out for them or gotten some guidance on where to vet that out, but then you're giving them a list of a choice. And so for when it's a control issue for why they're resisting it, that helps empower them. They have a voice and they have a say in who out of this list of people they want to go to. And sometimes that can break down some of the barriers and the resistance.
That's helpful. That's helpful. If our child is 18 or older and we think they should get counseling and even agree to, how can we be involved, or should we be involved?
So there's legal avenues with this. I do treat 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 17-year-olds. I treat all ages. So if your child is 18, they have to be the ones that legally consent to the services because they are, in the eyes of the law, an adult. But also, which I encourage, especially if they're still living in the home, and I encourage that my 18-year-old will sign a release of information. So that's a legal form where they are allowing me to have communication with a parent. And we can decide what that looks like, what's talked about. The 18-year-old can have choice in it, and the 18-year-old can sign it. If the 18-year-old signs it, then I can talk to the parents about whatever we've agreed that can be shared. It's a release of information, meaning I am legally allowed to speak to the parent more freely. If they don't sign it, then unfortunately they're 18 and a medical or mental health provider can't provide you any information. So
that helps. This is one that we see all the time and we deal with in student ministries. Can you give us some tips on how to emotionally support a child who's being bullied at school, and even when the school is not addressing the problem adequately?
Whew. Man, you guys are making me work tonight. Oh, it's such a big topic. I feel like it's its own topic and its own parent connect because there's like so much to go into and it's so prevalent. I mean, the quickest thing I can say is just be a safe place for your kid. School's not a safe place for some of our kids, and that's a sad, sad reality, but home can be a safe place for your child. So do everything in your power to have that be a safe place where they can come home and they can be comforted and they can share their emotions and they can talk about what happened at school. And then also we be an advocate, be a mama bear and a papa bear. You know, like sometimes that mean you got to go to the school and you've got to talk to the school administration. You might need to go to the school board. You might need to do some advocacy to create change if things really are not changing. Schools should be a safe place for our kids and for all of our kids, and it's very sad to me that they're not.
And I would encourage, that's really helpful. I'd also encourage, one thing we see a lot is a overreaction when they're being bullied at school. So there is extra bravado, if you will, in other places. And so a lot of times I'll see parents who are like, oh, there's no way he's getting bullied or she's getting bullied. Look how, tough they come off or whatever it is. And it's actually an overreaction. Shame is an enormous outcome of bullying, right? I'm so embarrassed that I'm getting bullied. I'm so embarrassed that that I'm getting made fun of or so forth. And so be looking for those signs. Again, it can be an overreaction of look how tough he is or she is. That it can actually be bravado that's just manifesting because they're ashamed and embarrassed. They're getting bullied at school.
And this is what I do in my house. And I've done it since my daughter's been in preschool. Our school mantra is be brave, be kind, be smart. And so I started that in preschool with her, and now she's in second grade. And so often I ask her how your day was, and I ask her, what are you learning? And, what was blah, 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 blah. What did you play with at recess? And then I ask her, what are things that you did that were kind today? And what are things that you saw in your classroom that were kind that other kids did? What is something you did that was brave today? What is something that you did that you learned today, right? So it just creates a whole different dialogue, of what her day looks like. It paints a different picture for me of what that looks like. So that's just an example of how I kind of get out more information from my child of what the day looks like. And then that could, in junior high and high school, that could lead into really helping you guys identify, is my child being bullied, or are other kids that I love in the school being bullied, and how can I support them and help them?
What can you share about a child's session? I'm assuming with the therapist, if their child's coming to you, what do you like to share with the parent?
Okay, I encourage, every therapist has their own style, and so I encourage you when you are calling to make an appointment that you ask this question to the therapist, because every therapist has a different answer and a different style. So legally, we have to break confidentiality. So our laws under my license in the state of California is I would have to break confidentiality if my client is a threat to themselves, a threat to others, if they're in if there's any abuse occurring, or if they're saying they're going to hurt. If they're being hurt, if they're going to hurt someone else, or if there's any abuse occurring, essentially, I have to, by law, I can't keep that information.
As do we as mandated reporters.
Yes, as mandated reporters. But there is also information that can be shared outside of that information. I can always share with the parents what our treatment goals are. So what are we focusing on in therapy? What are you paying for? Essentially, I can share that information very freely with you. You guys should know that information. I can also share with you interventions or tools that I'm teaching the kids, and I like to share that with parents because things are more successful. I'm with a kid 45 minutes once a week, once a month, a couple times, very limited. If I can teach them a skill and then teach the parent the skill that they can help encourage that at home, success is going to be much greater, right? And so I can always communicate this is a skill that I taught or a tool that I taught and things like that. The things that remain confidential are really the content, if you think about it like that. I'm not going to tell you direct dialogue of what's said because that needs to stay private. But you can definitely ask about what happens in the session. And also, I always communicate with the parent either before or after every session. It's very, very, for a minor child. So it's very, very rare that the parent has an opportunity to ask me questions for at least a few minutes of every session. Like I said, everyone has a different style. That's not everyone's style and everyone's experience. So I would really encourage you to ask that question when you're seeking a therapist.
How can a teacher support kids at their school?
A teacher?
How can a teacher support
teachers.
Kids and mental health?
Bless teachers for this pandemic. Oh my gosh. Thank you. If anyone is a teacher or works in a school, holy moly, you guys have, bless you. Know that I am praying for you because you guys are frontline workers and you guys are seeing it. You guys are seeing so many changes that are going to come as a result of the pandemic and everything that's gone along with it. So, teachers love on these kids, know that they have we don't know what's happened in homes when they weren't in school. We suspect. We know some people had really safe homes and some people had really unsafe homes. So like I said, teachers, anything you can do to make their time at school a safe place is helping that child, and is helping that teen. It's also not your responsibility. It's not a teacher's responsibility to take on the emotional and social needs of a child. You guys are there for a purpose, which is education. So I would look at it as more of like, you could be like a flag waver for a parent. Like you could see things that a parent might not see, and you could be like a messenger, right? It's not your responsibility to fix it. It's not necessarily your responsibility to deal with it, but you could definitely be a messenger because you have time with these kids where you could relate to parents. This is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm concerned about. You might want some extra help.
That's great. Absolutely. I think in that last category, and this wasn't asked, but family life, myself, Parker, Kathy, the entire family life team, our staff at VMC, we want to be on your team. We want to be on your teenagers' team. We want to be on your family's team. And so make sure that when you're in the trenches and these are things you're going through, please, as comfortable as you are, invite us in on those conversations. Those things stay with us. But what they do help us know is when you say, hey, Sarah's really struggling at Balboa right now. Hey, just so you know, Ben's having a really tough time at Foothill right now. This is going on, so forth. Thank you so much. What it allows us to do is not say, hey, mom called, said you're really having a tough time, but make sure we stay a little bit closer to your teenager, a little bit closer. Hey, checking in. Just want to see how you're doing. You want to grab some coffee? We want to be on your team. It's one of the greatest joys in our job. And so make sure you're inviting all of us onto your family's team for your teenager.